History. It isn't just a bunch of dates and names.
It's much more than that. History is the basis of our existence. Welcome to the history of 4 major WW1 battles.
Many battles occurred during World War I. But the battles we're covering include
The Battle of Somme,
the Battle of Jutland,
the Battle of Verdun, and the Battle of Amiens.
The Battle of Somme. The Battle of Somme was the most brutal battle in all of World War I. It was from July 1st to November 18th, 1916, and took place on the western front of the war near the River Somme in northern France. The purpose of this battle was for the French and British soldiers to approach and attack Germany, as the war had slowed down on the western front, and the two sides were in a deadlock. As well, since Germany had attacked Verdun in France, a battle which will be covered later, the British helped out by attacking Germany at the Somme River so as to weaken them. The British were led by General Sir Douglas Haig, the French were led by General Ferdinand Foch, and the Germans were led by General Erich von Falkenhayn. The first day of this battle, July 1st, is the most infamous day, as it went on to become the bloodiest day in the history of the British Army. To begin, 14 divisions of the British Army, who were all inexperienced and had not been in battle yet, approached at the north side of the River Somme, while 5 divisions of the French approached at the south side. The Germans had set up a strong defense at this 25-mile-long front, which proved to be extremely difficult for the Allied soldiers to get through. It was made up of 3 lines of trenches, an offensive trench called the fire trench, another called the support trench, and the third trench called the reserve trench, which was used for backup as well as a resting and healing place for hurt and tired soldiers. In front of these 3 trenches, there was strong barbed wire, which took an entire week-long attack with over 1,400 guns to break through. Because the barbed wire was so difficult to get past, mines were used to clear areas, and eventually the British had managed to occupy multiple German spaces and get to the second line of defense. While the Allies were trying to get across no man's land, many were killed due to the machine guns that the Germans had. At the end of the day of July 1st, there were over 57,000 casualties on the British side, including 19,000 deaths. The German and French numbers were much lower, being at 12,000 for Germany and 7,000 for France. One reason it was so bad for the British, aside from them not having any fighting experience, was because the Germans had figured out a way to spy on their battle plans from phone lines, and always knew their next move. To try and avoid this, soldiers would attempt to use other ways to communicate, such as light and flag signals, homing pigeons, and messengers. This day was so intense that the Germans had to borrow many of their resources and soldiers from the Battle of Verdun, which showed that the Allies' plan to weaken the Germans had worked. Fighting went on through July, and by the end, 160,000 Germans and 200,000 British and French had died. By the end of August, the Germans didn't know what to do and how they could win this battle. Eventually, they came up with the plan to change leadership, and General Erich von Falkenhayn got replaced with Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff. With these new people in charge, Germany's strategies changed. They created more of a defensive line behind the Somme front, which allowed them to hurt more Allied soldiers. On September 15th, the battle saw the first appearance of tanks at the Battle of Flers-Courcelette. To note, the Battle of Flers-Courcelette was a miniature battle during the Battle of Somme. The British won and acquired the land of Flers, Courcelette, and surrounding area. Because this was the first instance of tanks being used in battle, they weren't very advanced and many broke down, but became more reliable later on. By October, the British were having a very hard time. They were struggling to make it through the muddy ground and the many defenses that the Germans had. By November, after one last attack on the Germans at the Anchor River Valley, another miniature battle, the British ended up winning this as well, it was time for the British to step out of the battle, as they had lost too many people and resources. On November 18th, 1916, General Sir Douglas Haig called off any other attacks on the Germans, which signaled an end to the Battle of Somme. Overall, this battle lasted 141 days. There were many casualties on all sides, with there being nearly 500,000 for the Germans, 200,000 for the French, and 420,000 for the British. Despite the British only getting about 7 miles into German territory, they still ended up winning the battle as it drained many of the German supplies and soldiers, making it easier for the Allies in other parts of the war as the Germans, who had a strong army, were significantly weakened.
The Battle of Jutland. Often when people think of wars, they think of trenches, no man's land, and more. But there were also naval battles. One of the largest naval battles was the Battle of Jutland. It was Germany against the UK. The British have always been known for their excellent navy. No one could beat it. The Germans, on the other hand, didn't have a great navy in the beginning, but Wilhelm, the last German emperor and king of Prussia, decided to build up their navy to rule the waves. In fact, he was kind of insane. He believed that if he built up their army, then Britain would respect them, when in fact the opposite happened. The British didn't care one bit, as they are the rulers of the waves. This upset the Germans. The British's goal throughout the war was to block out Germany. They were both very cautious. Then later, the British found the naval codes of the Germans. This allowed the British to intercept the German code messages. One last battle occurred just before the Battle of Jutland. In this battle, the British could have destroyed the Germans then and there, but they had a signaling error, so the British fleet backed off. The Battle of Jutland occurred as the Germans were trying to get mad with the British. This is because the British were not allowing resources to go to the Germans. The Germans no longer had access to weapons and soon food. They were slowly starving now. In fact, instead of Germans saying hello, they now greeted each other with "May God punish England." Germany created a plan to trap the British. The High Seas, which is the Germans' fleet commander, was Admiral Scheer, and his goal was to get the British fleet to sail to Skagerrak, where they would be able to destroy them. They were going to create a scene to draw them in where a bigger fleet would be to destroy them. The British Grand Fleet was 28 battleships, 9 battlecruisers, 38 cruisers, and 78 destroyers, which was divided into 2 parts under the control of Sir John Jellicoe, who had the larger part, and the other half was commanded by Admiral Beatty, who had the smaller part. The Germans had 22 battleships, 6 battlecruisers, 11 light cruisers, and 63 destroyers. They were also divided into 2 parts, with Admiral Hipper leading the smaller part and Scheer, who led the larger half. The British figured out the Germans' plan as they had their decoder. Learning their plan, they decided to have a small fleet go out and meet the Germans, and they have a larger fleet in the back. So basically, they had the exact same plan. Eventually, on the day, May 31st, 1916, they were lured out. You couldn't see very well, though, as water was being splashed around and it was a foggy day. So when they both saw a merchant boat sailing between them, they went to investigate when they eventually discovered each other. At 2:30 p.m., the fight begun. Sailors are very precise with their timekeeping. Hipper tries to draw on the British to execute their plan, and does so successfully. Beatty takes the bait, and they exchange fire by 4:30 p.m. The Germans had sunk 3 battleships, and 2,000 sailors had died. Beatty realizes it's a trap and turns back. He had a famous quote, "There seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today." They end up turning around, and both the small and larger German fleet follow. 2 more British ships have sunk by this point. Once the British ships were all together again, they end up pulling a maneuver called crossing the T. This is basically when the British deployed themselves from east to west as the top of the T, so that the ships are facing sideways to the Germans, and the Germans go straight onwards, acting as the bottom of the T. This allows the British to hit them with maximum amounts of firepower. At 6:15, the British opened fire. The British ended up causing enough damage that the Germans turned around and fled. The Germans lost 1 battlecruiser, 1 old battleship, 4 large cruisers, and 5 destroyers, and 2,550 sailors, while the British lost 3 battlecruisers, 3 armed cruisers, 8 destroyers, and over 6,000 sailors.
The Battle of Verdun. Verdun was a battle held between France and Germany. The battle took hold in a fortified French town in the hills next to the Meuse River. The Germans chose to attack here because it threatened their main communications line. It also would have taken a huge toll on France's defenses. It is known as the longest, most brutal battle, taking 303 days. The Battle of Verdun began on the 21st of February 1916 at 4 a.m. and lasted until December 18, 1916. During this battle, Germany fired over 2 million shells within the first 8 opening hours of the fight, and by the end of the battle, tens of millions of shells were fired. Neither Germany or France gained much land. The attack on the French was originally arranged by a German chief of general staff, Erich von Falkenhayn. The original plan was to secure victory for Germany on the Western Front. He wanted to take out the French army before it was too late and the Allies grew in strength through the full deployment of the British forces. The overall results of the battle ended with the French as victorious, even though the Germans should take French by surprise. In the end, both sides had a great loss of soldiers. An estimated amount of 800,000 soldiers were found dead, injured, or missing in total. The French casualties were about 400,000, and the German casualties were about 350,000.
The Battle of Amiens. This battle took place in France and lasted roughly 7 days, starting August 8, 1918, ending August 11, 1918. The battle was a major offense that involved the British, French, and Austrian armies. The Battle of Amiens took place during World War I, and the main purpose of this battle was to break the German lines and protect the Paris-Amiens vital railway. However, it marked the beginning of the Allied 100 Days offense that ultimately led to the end of the war by pushing back the German forces. It was considered a turning point into the war on the Western Front. But who ran the battle? General Ferdinand Foch would be that man. Not only was he the leader of the battle, he was also the supreme Allied commander on the Western Front and did the role of planning and directing the Battle of Amiens. The Battle of Amiens also a surprise attack that ended the trench warfare on the Western Front. The battle was also a complete surprise to the Germans, who were quickly overrun and forced to retreat, which demonstrated the Allies' superior tactics, equipment, and material strength, which was also their success. The technological achievements were tanks, aircrafts, and wireless communications. The achievements allowed the Allies to coordinate attacks and gain upper hand over the Germans. The most important tank was the Mark V tank because it was more reliable and easier to use than previous models. However, the Whippet was lighter and faster and designed to quickly exploit the gaps created by the heavier tanks, acting like a mechanic cavalry. The aircraft was very useful because the Allies had control of the skies, sometimes outnumbered the Germans 5-1. It was used to photograph the German position and direct fire as well.
So many battles occurred during World War I, but these are some of the largest battles.
In the end, hundreds and thousands of people died, and not just within these 4 battles.
World War I is an important part of our history that people should know about, starting with these 4 battles.
We could only do so much in 10 minutes, but we encourage you to research more battles.
See you next time!